Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to another of our Managing Your Small Business Through the Pandemic webinars. As part of our Webinar Wednesday focus, this will be number 44 of the weekly webinar series that began back on March 18th. Webinars began a lot sooner than that on Webinar Wednesday, but in March 18th was significant because that was the first EIDL, the first talk about EIDL and the disaster loan. So thank you for joining us. I'm Kelly Bearden. I'm the director of the CSU Bakersfield Small Business Development Center. And as many of you realize, we're part of the Central California SBDC network, part of the School of Business and Public Administration, CSUB. And we cover 3 counties of the 14 in the Central California region. Those 3 counties include the County of Kern, the County of Inyo, and the County of Mono. Additionally, we have 5 other centers that you can reach out if you need any guidance, and there's plenty of information out there at the other 5 centers, and those are located in Clovis, Merced, Modesto, Salinas, and San Luis Obispo. So reach out if you have a need. Services are free. At least most services are free. The consulting, meet with a consultant if you have the need. So today what we're going to do is we're going to be going through a lot of information, just a ton of information. Welcome you to put your questions in the Q&A box. We'll also be sharing some links and some other vital information we think in the chat box, but do try to put your questions in the Q&A box, and what we'll do is we'll be here and answering them till about the end. So thank you to our sponsors and that make Webinar Wednesday possible. And let's get going. So what's up today? Today, we're already up to January 13th. Well, we got a lot of things happening today. Today, PPP is open for the first time everywhere. So all lenders are basically open. And what we're finding is that with them being open, we're starting to see activity that's happening. For those that did not get a PPP loan during the first application period that ran until August. We're going to also jump in today and talk a lot about PPP2. The second draw, as it's called. It's going wide on Friday. Today, you can actually get in if you're with a local institution that's under $1 billion in assets. So very small, maybe credit unions and other smaller community lenders and CDFIs and many others are going to be opening today for the second draw of PPP. So one thing we'll probably mention is that now that the $284 billion program is opening, it's really going to be interesting to see how long the funds last. And this is something we'll probably repeat sometimes today. There is a lot of speculation on if it'll last for weeks, for months, whatever. And being completely different than the original programs, we'll maybe touch on this in a bit. So also today, the California Relief Grant Program, the little program that is about $500 million put out by the state of California through the Office of the Small Business Advocate. That is actually, the first round is actually due tonight. So at 11:59 p.m., it'll be due. Give a quick COVID testing update and some positive news that maybe we're seeing in the Central Valley on COVID and COVID testing and potentially flattening out and getting our businesses open faster. A brief update, because there's not a lot of guidance that we received on the shuttered venues and the save our stages as far as EIDL grants go. So we'll also, take your questions. So put your questions in the box, have some email to me, and I will try to remember to get through those. And also our poll. So let's jump into the poll right now. And it's going to be more of a pop quiz than a poll, just a brief one with a lot of information to cover today. We'll just cover this relatively briefly. And so let's launch the poll. And because this information is needed and will come up later in the webinar, I figured I would try to, it surprised me with the number. So let's see how it goes with you. So the question is going to be on our poll is just a little pop quiz on what is the median household income in California. And this is in 2019. and it's according to a website, the departmentofnumbers.com. And so what we're looking for is the median income according to the website we just mentioned. So you're jumping in and voting. It's 68,000 plus 75, 80, or 92. This is going to be important because when we start talking about the EIDL grant, the next portion of the EIDL grant, it is tied to your census tract and also the state median. So one of these numbers, one of these variables is going to be known in just a couple of minutes. And we have about 71% of you that have voted on our pop quiz. And let's end the poll and share the results. And the results, 47% of you said $75,070. Real close to that, 42% was $68,880, 11% $80,000, and $80,440. And just one of you took the high road and took the high number of 92,345. Well, the correct answer, according to the website, is number C, 80,440. And again, that's going to come up later as part of our discussion on the EIDL grant. And what it is that you must be in a census tract that is 80% of the median household income to be classified under this definition as a lower moderate to income census tract and eligible for this. So if we go 80,000, we're talking a little over 64,000 for your particular census tract. And well, we'll share some of that information to you, which if you looked at the entire county of Kern, I believe the latest information has the median household income in either 2018 or 19 at about in the low to mid 50s. So, but there will be census tracts in there that are higher and some that are lower, and it does do that. So we will talk about that in a little bit. So let's get into PPP. And with the PPP, let's start talking about some of the things that are going on. Well, let's first get into the COVID testing sites. I can't wait to talk about that PPP, but we do have a number of COVID testing sites that, as we see, we've talked about a lot about the Latino Task Force. That has been a great program put out by the Hispanic Chamber and others in the community. And they have been doing mobile testing. A lot of the fixed testing is getting so much in place in so many areas in Kern County. We see it in Bakersfield. You can go 8 to 5 Monday through Friday and get tested at Kern Medical Center. And you see a number of other places in Arvin and Wasco and in Lamont and up in Tehachapi. And even out in Rosamond. So Rosamond even has, and also in the Kern River Valley and Mountain Mesa. So there are a lot of resources that are available. There's the sites in Kern County. We saw some encouraging news yesterday when the governor allowed Sacramento County, which had about a 10% ICU rate. And in the San Joaquin and LA regions, it's been closer to 0, but the mandate was 15%. If you went under the 15%, it forced closures of many of your businesses. And the governor backed off of that yesterday. So apparently they must be seeing some type of maybe plateauing that's happening after the holidays. So we're encouraging a lot of the testing that's available out there and for you to do it. And we're going to kind of focus on our 3 counties that we serve right now. And so right now we're looking at Inyo County. And so there's 2 sites in Inyo County that are doing testing right now, and that's the Tri-County Fairgrounds in Bishop. It'll be in the Tallman Pavilion. And yes, I've been to the Tallman Pavilion a few times. We hosted our 2018 Eastern Sierra Capital Summit there. Easy access, nice room, every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and also in Lone Pine at the Lone Pine Senior Center. Haven't been to the Lone Pine Senior Center, but I'm sure it's a wonderful facility for doing testing every Friday. So those are available. Let's go back and try to see if I can do a little bit better with, get you my, well, there's testing going on in Mono County too, and it's going on, as you see there, in Mammoth Lakes, Tuesdays and Fridays. and also in the North County up in the Antelope Valley part in Colville, just down the road from Walker. So there's our testing that's available, and free testing in the 3 counties. If you're outside of our 3-county region, do reach out and look for some of the testing that's going on in those communities. So California Relief Grant that opened 2 weeks ago, with much fanfare on December 30th. That first round closes tonight, and I think for some of us, it can't close soon enough. There have been, as most of you or many of you know that are applying for that process, that there has been kind of a, there's been a lot of issues in getting your application in. And so the portal has got a lot of different resources. If you're just new to this and haven't really started, we suggest you go to YouTube and look at our YouTube video that we posted about 2 weeks ago on the eligibility. We're not going to go through the eligibility. We're going to go through some of the solutions and trying to get as many of our small businesses in the portal at 11:59 p.m. tonight when the first round closes. And that first round is going to be about $237.5 million that is going to be allocated. And we know the $237 million is going to go to businesses that have $2.5 million in revenue or less. That it would entitle you for up to a $25,000 grant, all the way down to $5,000 grant for those that are under $100,000 in revenue. Again, I like to always show people how it's going to be scored, because we're in a competitive situation with this grant. And some people are going to be more competitive than others. And I think the first round will demonstrate that, but we'll see. So it's going to be those most affected by COVID-19 and have the regional stay-at-home orders, which is in our San Joaquin Valley. And most of our Central California region has been impacted significantly by COVID-19 and the stay-at-home orders. Your business being financially impacted, and that is going to be a common theme today. We're going to be talking about gross revenue loss. And it's also true in the California Grant Program. They're going to be looking at certain industries. So when you put in your NACE code, it's going to tell you, the grantor, exactly what type of business yours is and where you can get into that. And we'll look at some NACE codes in a few minutes when we get into the PPP too. But obviously, it's going to be our retail businesses and our hospitality, our restaurants and health and wellness, personal care, spas and barbershops, along with some other businesses that are certainly most impacted. Our underserved small business groups will also be benefiting from the scoring here. And so we're looking at women-owned, minority, persons of color-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, businesses located in low to moderate income and in rural communities. So that's what we have right now as far as the determination. As far as some of the latest changes, I can tell you that the call center has been getting a lot of calls from what I have been told. I know that because in the last 10 days, we have got a numerous amount of calls. Literally dozens a day are coming in with people that are experiencing some type of portal application issue. So with the portal application issue, we've been able to try to assist many. The Lindustry call center is going to be open until 11 p.m. tonight. And so if you've received an email from them with their call center phone number, I know many of you have experienced a great deal of frustration in trying to get through. So in order to do this, what we're doing is we are actually now trying to host a little Zoom forum this afternoon, and that is going to be at 3 o'clock. It's going to be not in our webinar format that we normally use. We'll talk about that in just a second, but there's also going to be a number of last-minute resources that are available and more. So our little thing that we're going to do this afternoon, and this just kind of came up yesterday, so this hasn't been well promoted. It's going to be in our Zoom room. We're going to feature our CSUB SBDC very own Lynn Gannon. Lynn has completed an entire application herself, in addition to literally talking with dozens of people on the phone over the last 10 days since returning after the holidays back on, let's see, that would be Monday the 5th. So today we're going to have that. It's going to be limited to 100 applicants. If we're going to try to get that link right there into the chat. And into the chat, that link will have a meeting idea, and you will need that passcode right there. So if we can get that passcode in there too as well. So you'll need the passcode. And one other key thing is this is going to be a very informal setting to where you can ask a question based on application problems that you're having. If you have any eligibility issues or there's other resources on the web, such as I mentioned our YouTube video that we did on 12/30 that goes through the process of actually determining if you're eligible, what the funds can be used for, and some other uses. So this is going to be this afternoon at 3 o'clock only to address application issues, problems you're having getting it in and getting it submitted before the deadline tonight for the first round of funding. As such, since it's going to be formal, we will not be recording this particular meeting today, and we will try to get as many questions as we can get to over that time. As Lynn has really done a marvelous job of assisting clients. Many have reached out to me and being able to really kind of, after you hear the same question about 5 times, I think she told me that it gets a little bit easier. So we'll do that today at 3, and that'll be a resource that's available to try to help those that are looking for answers for the California Relief Grant program that is submitting tonight. So Economic Aid Act is the name we use now for this new bit of legislation. Before we had the CARES Act, and so the second major stimulus program is going to be the Economic Aid Act. And I identified originally probably 5, what I thought were the big 5. It's gone up to about 7. It could even go a little bit higher. And just to refresh those, the big one is, of a $900 billion program, what we're doing is we're really looking at that second draw PPP. That is nearly a third. It's in the first draw of PPP combined with that is nearly a third of the entire stimulus package. So quality firms, we have more information as we've received more guidance from SBA, and there's more rules that have been determined. We have some forms to go through, so there's a lot of information that we'll be able to dissect out of the forms. The PPP first draw, which opened, as I said, wide, which is any bank that's willing or wanting to do those can start doing them today. It was limited, they opened on Monday for limited distribution to smaller institutions, but now it looks like that we are completely open on that. And we are getting some questions on what banks are available and what banks are doing this. Locally, I know the Bakersfield Chamber's done a great job of trying to work with their lender members and trying to see, and a quick release this morning, I heard the Valley Strong Credit Union portal was open and receiving not the second draw, but the first draw. If you hadn't applied before, it is now open for new firms that we're going to get into. It's going to be open for certain nonprofits and others that did not receive an initial PPP. And if you recall back then, we had a lot of individuals who were really kind of skeptical about accepting a PPP because they weren't sure about the rules. They weren't sure about if they would be able to meet the obligations. And many of those couldn't afford any more debt and really wanted that unforgiven, that debt forgiven aspect of it. So that is open today. We'll continue to update you on lenders and banks. They got a lot of this information that we got at the same time. Of the 5,000 lenders, I think we're seeing many of those are going through determining if they're going to open, if they're going to do the program, the second phase of the program. And many of them are also determining when they will open. So it's kind of a moving subject. No new guidance on the next 2 items on the events, theaters, and shuttered venues, the $15 billion available, but we will kind of give an update on that. And we do expect guidance very near in the future on both that program and the new EIDL grant program. And I know EIDL's getting a little confusing because we had an EIDL loan, an EIDL advance, and now we have a new EIDL grant program. But we have a lot of details on the new EIDL grant. So we'll go through some of that a little bit later today. The other big aspect were the tax and the PPP forgiveness changes, which we're going to probably defer to probably next week or the week after. But with the PPPs opening up again, it's going to really take most of our time. And we added the PUA, the Pandemic Unemployment Insurance, for displaced contractors and other self-employed people that could actually file for unemployment for the first time through the last bit of series. So PPP, lots of PPP to discuss. So we do have it opened today. It's open everywhere if you're going to be a first-time borrower. If you did not take out a loan last year before it closed on the 8th of August, we'll be able to now apply for a PPP loan. And again, like we had kind of mentioned over the first set of PPP, generally, if you can find a bank and last time there were over 5,000 of them. So there were a lot of local and community banks here in Kern County that were doing them. The bigger banks were doing them, a lot of fintech companies, a lot of the companies that people work with their payments. They were doing them. So there's a lot of resources out there, a lot of individuals that are doing those. So what we're seeing is that it's expanded now into some other areas. So those that want to apply for the first round of the PPP, the first-time borrowers, are eligible to do so. And this includes now some medical facilities that weren't previously able to actually do that. Also, we have some media sources, newspapers, smaller newspapers, TVs, radio, broadcasters, etc. Some housing cooperatives and nonprofits have been expanded to include now 501c6s, membership-based organizations. We already had the 501c3s, the for-public benefit corporations, but now it includes the membership groups, the trade groups, the chambers of commerce, other business groups, and others. And then for those that are filing for the first time, you're going to be under the rules that most of our, or if not all of our first-time borrowers had. And that is a number of different rules that we will get into, but most of it's going to be geared toward the PPP second draw. So a couple of things. What we're seeing some new eligible expenses that can actually go back. And this can actually go back for your first round of PPP if you had it for loan forgiveness. It can go back for your first application, and it can go back for your second draw. So a variety of these new PPP eligible expenses can be used for a variety of different programs over what we've talked about. So that includes now, as far as eligible PPP expenses, covered employment protection and workplace modification, including PPE. It also includes maybe an outdoor dining or tent facility, indoor plexiglass, or other ways to separate and distance employees and customers that are consistent with COVID-19 federal guidelines. For the first time, and this is really something that I think a lot of people were excited to see, that expenditures to suppliers that are essential at the time of purchase and that are current are now eligible. So you can't really kind of go back through and pull out, I believe, older invoices that were to suppliers, but those that are current, and to keep the business current and open and going was something that I think Congress heard loud and clear that needed to be included as part of the eligible PPP expenditures. So we also have additional expenditures that are covered operating expenses, such as payments for software or cloud computing that assist a business in either the delivery, the payment, the tracking of payroll expenses or processing, your HR, sales and billing functions, and accounting, or tracking of supplies, inventory records, or expenses. So I think that this really kind of came out with the additional expenditures that businesses were facing with maybe addressing an online platform and maybe moving some of their sales online and some of the other things that were needed to facilitate going online as far as shuttered businesses were faced. And then the last one is also covered property damage cost that were related to damages from vandalism or looting in 2020 that were not covered by insurances. So that's kind of a recap of our PP1 and our Ppp eligible expenses. Let's do something. Let's change up this slide, and let me do a new share here. And let me go in and let's kind of jump into something that we did a lot of earlier, and something that we did a lot, and that was kind of jumping to websites. And let me jump up here to, first of all, we're going to be talking a lot about NAICS codes, and we've talked about them already. We're going to be talking about a lot of the 72 series because that is your accommodation and food services. You know, we had talked earlier about potentially some of the hard-hit businesses might be identified by NAICS code, and in some programs they have. In the PPP, though, it's going to be those that can request more money, and request more money if you're part of this 72 series accommodation and food service. So again, the NAICS code is kind of like the standard industry code. It kind of does an effort to put your business into a number of different categories. These are the hospitality and major food items. If you see, the number of businesses are listed on the right. So entirely of accommodation and food businesses that we have across the country, we have a little over 900,000 that are going to be eligible for this 3.5 months of payroll and actually employment and self-employment income. So here you see a number of these. What you can do is you can click on and see that most of these are going to be actually restaurants and other eating places. I don't think that surprises a great deal. The 6-digit NAICS code, if you go under restaurants and others, this will expand out and actually show us some of the others that are there. And actually with this particular site, it'll show you the largest that are in that particular code. So under restaurants and other eating places, for example, we have the full service restaurants and limited service restaurants, which would include fast serve and probably your quick serve restaurants, and maybe some of your other mobile options that you have. And then also you have cafeterias, grills, snacks, and etc. So that's a little bit about our NAICS codes and what we're looking at. Again, it's a broad category. Includes both lodging and food. I know I'm going to get a question on my Airbnb. So let me just throw that out right now. You'll see here that Airbnb doesn't really show up anywhere in lodging establishments. And it's going to probably come down to how you file your taxes. If you file your Airbnb taxes potentially on a Schedule C, what you're going to find is that the Schedule C is for business, and Schedule E, if 1040 Schedule C and 1040 Schedule E are going to really kind of determine if those are going to be eligible. Drink time. So that's a little bit about NAICS codes. Now, one of the other things as we get into PPP2's discussion is let's jump in and kind of look at what the new form is going to look like. And so on the Payroll Protection Program, we're looking at the second draw borrower application form. Through the process, the borrower will have an application form and the lender will have one on each borrower. So this is the one that's going to ask for information on the type of entity that you are up in the left-hand corner. It's going to also talk about a lot of the contact information. And of course, your NAICS code is there. Contact information, and then we'll get down to the average monthly payroll. The average monthly payroll is going to be the same as it was on your first filing in 2019. So There could be some exceptions to that, but it looks like it's going to be pretty much the 2019 that you requested, and we'll kind of show some examples of that in just a little bit. So purposes of loans of which to apply for and what the expenditures would be for, you can actually, if it's me and I'm filling this out, I'm checking every one of those to keep my options and my flexibility open. Of course, payroll costs are going to have to be 60% as they were with PPP1. Again, extraordinarily important is payroll costs being at that 60% level. As we look down the form also, we'll also see, your first draw SBA number, and then we get into the reduction. And the reduction is something we'll talk about quite a bit today, and that's going to be the 25% reduction that allows you to go after the second round of PPP. So it's interesting here that it says that applicants for 150 or less can leave this part of the process blank and actually apply and provide the information before seeking loan forgiveness or upon SBA request. So we'll get into a few of the supporting documentation that I think is going to be required and what SBA is looking at, but it was really important that the smaller firms, they wanted to make sure that they got in, and if they had a harder time coming up with quarterly financial statements to demonstrate the loss from 2020 over 2019, then it will be pretty straightforward. And as you see here, you can reference one quarter. You just need to identify what the quarter is and have your receipts in 20 and 19. And if it's over a 25% reduction, then you would qualify. So again, probably with your same, it's a 20% or more equity ownership is what is considered an applicant. So if you have, again, that wonderful business with 5 partners that each own 20%, you're all going to be included in there. And then we're going to get into the questions regarding eligibility. And with eligibility, SBA will not accept an application from somebody who is presently suspended, debarred, proposed for debarment, or other ineligible, or is presently involved in a bankruptcy. If you had a former bankruptcy, and see, this one kind of caught me by surprise because I thought if you were in a present bankruptcy that you would be able to apply. But I guess that rule is only going back to past bankruptcies. So they'll also ask if you've ever had, and let's just kind of jump ahead to, there's going to be those that if there's been any felony convictions, there's going to be if it's a franchise. So there's a lot of different application questions that you will be asked to answer. And so on that, it is nice, and we're going to try to include these forms in our distribution that we do in a day or two after the webinar with a copy of the webinar and a lot of the links we discussed today. Some of those won't be as timely, but it kind of goes through, and really one of the things that we've really asked people to really pay a lot of attention to is the certification, the authorization and the certification. And that is just because a lot of this is now coming down to you just validating and you certifying under penalty of perjury that everything that you're stating is correct. We talked a little bit about fraud in the past. I think SBA is looking to take out some of the fraud aspect. I think most of that fraud came from fraudulent companies that weren't even existing businesses that applied and received some of the funding. So to question that or to counter that, they're going to be asking that you actually upload tax returns this time. Your bank will be doing that. But there'll be a bunch of authorizations, and we don't have the time to go through this. But please go through and look at these and make sure before you sign your John Henry down there that you understand and actually authorize all those. Okay, so there is your application form, and gone through the NACE. Kind of covers a good part of the online part. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. Or actually, let's go back to one of our friends from the past, and that is our Excel spreadsheet. So for those of you that have been along for the ride, most of you that have been around for the early parts, or even until just maybe 8 or 10 weeks ago, one of our features that we would get into would be our PPP by the numbers, of which we have a number of different things here that we can share with you. And this was a PPP1 example that we actually had earlier. So we're now looking at a tracking form that we used earlier. And basically, we'll have new examples of these. Let me just pop up this one for budgeting purposes. We encouraged people at the SBDC to really kind of manage and budget your forecast for your PPP expenses. And we see now why this has been so critical with some of the discussion we're going to have in a moment. But what we're seeing is, with this new format, we're seeing the 24 weeks. We are assuming that this is one that begins on January 31st. And what we've done is, in addition to the expenditures that we had before that were authorized, we've added these now that are authorized as well now as eligible PPP expenditures. Remember, I know some of you had needed to pay suppliers, you had needed to pay back taxes or other things. You know, the one thing that is kind of unique about this entire experience is those would go down here under other costs and those would not be forgiven. However, you have to remember, even though you might have used the funds initially, this is an accounting that can go over a 24-week covered period of time. So for example, if I needed to pay a supplier, I can generate cash flow or other resources during that period of time and actually pay them with those particular funds. Going back to my tracking of the PPP1, you'll see in our example here, this $100,000 loan was actually went over a 14-week period of time. Now, I could have gone longer with payroll here because there were 10 more weeks that I was eligible. So if I would have incurred a cost that I put in here, let's say, that was an ineligible cost, which isn't on there, but if I would have, I could have taken that out and actually used eligible funds over the covered period of this grant. Important note that just because you might have accounted for it or you might have used the cash proceeds for that, it could have been maybe, I hate to use the term a short-term loan to yourself or your business, but it could have been just not listed as an eligible cost. And then when you incurred these expenditures that are eligible expenses taken at that time. Okay. Hope I didn't confuse too many of you. Hope I didn't confuse more of you than I did myself. So we'll include this as well. We'll get this out and get this floated. It's been updated a little bit. It's going to be it's going to start your 168-day period, which is a 24-week covered period, is going to start when you receive your second draw funds, and just kind of gives you an idea of how you can track this and try to budget it to where you spend it all down. So that's that, and let's get it back to the PowerPoint and actually reshare and go through some of the PPP2 other provisions and information. So as mentioned, it's going to be for 300 employees or less, and you can demonstrate the 25% is crucial. It right now is the only milestone we have for depicting that you have a reduced, hard hit business that can qualify for the second round. Is that subject to change? It's possible. It's possible. It's going to really kind of be driven by demand and by how much we have out there, how the money's flowing. If you remember the first round, we had originally 349 billion, and there was a mad rush to get in. It was up to potentially 10 million for the applicants. A lot of that went to the really high end, between 2 and 10 million, which is not going to be part of the second draw provision. You can only go to $2 million on this. So again, the 3.5 months or the 3.5 times your your average payroll from 2019 really equates to a 40% increase. So $100,000 PPP 1 will yield you, if you're eligible, a $140,000 PPP second draw. So you can still add all the expenditures that we talked about a little bit earlier. There's some set-asides for some smaller and hopefully some minority and underserved businesses, some rural and veteran-owned businesses, and some other set-asides to try to get more individuals in. And what they're looking at as far as the 25% reduction, we talked about the quarter to quarter. So if your quarter in 2020, you had a reduction of 25% or more over the same quarter of 2019, or if you experienced a 25% drop based on your tax returns, annual tax returns, and they might go profit and losses because it's going to be really difficult for individuals to have a 2020 tax return in by January 13th. So if you had a full year 25% or larger drop, that would be probably an easier filing to make at this time rather than the quarter, and maybe even demonstrate a greater need. So that's kind of what a 25% reduction is going to look like. Again, here are some of the things that, and we're not going to really get into the seasonal employers, and I know we have a lot of seasonal employers out there. We will cover that in detail next week. From what I've noticed of seasonal employers is that some of their periods that they can use for their 12-week period is actually improved with the PPP second draw. More next week. Okay, some of the things that are really kind of boiling down below the surface that are extraordinarily crucial if you really want to go after a PPP second draw. And one of them is something that isn't really kind of talked about a lot, but that is that you must have spent all of your first draw funds, all of them. So if you received $100,000 PPP1 and you spent $99,500, everything else is applicable. You've had the 25-week drop. You're in a 72-digit code NACE, then you can apply. From my understanding on this is that you have had to spend all of your funds, which is really crucial to take that 24-week covered period. With the 24 full week period, it gives you time to actually pay those other expenses. So you must use all the funds, and all of the funds must be for allowable uses. So when I gave my example earlier, this is what I was setting up. When I was in the spreadsheet talking about how you might have maybe used the direct funds that were available at that time for that, but through either other sources of money that you put into the business, that you were able to actually generate some cash flow from the business during the months you were open, or other money that was committed as far as capital for that business. Those are all things over that 24-week period that can turn those into allowable uses. So the PPE expenses can now be added. So maybe you had a variety of expenditures that you used for PPE, for a tent, for modifying outdoor dining, etc. And those were not PPP eligible expenses at the time you took them. They are now. Now, I don't know the exact process if you've already sought the forgiveness process for your first loan. It seemed like that you had one shot at that and it was one and done, but this could be a wonderful case where procrastination or waiting or using your 10-month period after your covered period ends is beneficial for your purpose. So we talked about the special rules for under 125. Let's go to the next slide. Gross receipts. So we're looking kind of here at a little bit of the gross receipts and getting into what is the interim final rule? And the interim final rule is exactly what it says. It's an interim final rule, which is which is comical, I know at times, but the thing to remember about it is you have the rules. When you do something under this program, whatever the rules are at the time, you are subjected to those rules. For example, they might come back, or let's use an example earlier. They came back and said that with an interim final rule that they reduced payroll from 75% to 60. So if I would have had an 8-week window and I would have filed for forgiveness under the 75%, that was the rule in place at that time. If I waited for the 24-week, that was the rule that was in place. So you're not going to be held accountable for a rule that actually changes if your intent was to follow that rule when it was in place. So with this one, it's the gross receipts, and it's just not sales. The SBA has a definition of gross receipts, and it basically includes whatever sources that are out there. It could be, or many of the other sources that are out there in addition to operating revenue from your business. So it can include interest, dividends, royalties, fees, commissions, and other things. It does not include your first draw PPP loan. It is not to be included in gross receipts for this purposes. And there's the reference where you can go look at the SBA size regulations, 13 CFR section 121-104. And that will give you that particular, and we'll try to include that also. I think I have that in a Word document that we don't have time to share right now, but we can get into that later. One of the other things that popped up was that we were trying to determine was entities with ties with China are ineligible for PPP2. So now we have some more ineligible ties with China definitions. And as you can see, it heavily affects the People's Republic of China and also the special region of Hong Kong now. So in those areas, if it was created, organized, has significant operations, if the business there owns directly or indirectly, not less than 20%, has board of directors of the concern, a person who resides in the People's Republic of China, essentially it's going to be ineligible under PPP second draw. So there's a little bit on that particular rule. I don't see anything about Taiwan being listed here. So let me see, the People's Republic of China, that would be the Republic of China, ROC, Taiwan, would not be considered in that, it appears. And there's a definition, a little bit of what is considered an economic loss for idle purposes. And again, we have our idle loan, we have our idle advance that we had last year, and now we have a few more rules and regulations that have come down on idle and identifying what this targeted idle, this $20 billion that's going to be available in 2021 and how they're going to process that. And we'll talk about the shuttered grants venues next week in more detail. Expect guidance by then and a lot of details. But again, if you have a venue that sells tickets, that has a sound system, oftentimes you're going to be able to qualify for this. If you have a corner of your bar where you have a stool and where people can actually have an open mic, you're probably not going to qualify. So again, you cannot combine the shuttered grants venue with the PPP2. So you need to kind of do a calculation to see if you qualify for both, what is going to be most beneficial for you. And back to the idle grant, the $20 billion. So for that particular $20 billion idle grant, you're going to need to be located in a low-income community. And the low-income community, at least the definition I have seen, is that takes the median household income of the state of California and compares it to census tracts. And we have to show a 20% drop in that area. As far as your business, it also has to have an economic loss. And the economic loss we've talked about with the PPP second draw is 25%. For EIDL purposes, the EIDL grant, it's going to be 30%. So those that are even been disadvantaged more. And you see some of the rules and regulations and some of the entities that can actually qualify. So, I'm expecting a little bit more information on this, but from what I read into this is that first bullet is really kind of telling me that you're eligible for the EIDL grant and you're eligible to apply if you applied from an EIDL from anywhere from last year through the end of this year. So I don't know the exact process if you're going to need to reapply. We're encouraging people not to go to the EIDL portal and applying, and do not wait for future guidance and how this is going to be handled. The people that are going to really benefit from this are those that did not receive the full $10,000 through the first EIDL Advance program. You might recall that through EIDL and EIDL Advance, you were eligible for up to a $10,000 EIDL grant, EIDL Advance. And those generally came after you applied for the EIDL loan. So if you were approved, then you received up to $150,000 EIDL loan. If you were not approved for the EIDL loan, the EIDL Advance turned into a grant. So it turned into essentially a forgivable loan. So with that, if you received $1,000 and now you can come back and claim up to the additional $9,000 this particular year. So again, a little bit more on the process for how we're going to apply, and we are expecting that soon. So we'll get into that. There's your official definition of Section 45D, Subchapter E of the Internal Revenue Code, that determines a low-income community and does not exceed 80% of the statewide median family income. We're using median household income. I believe that's the same. And so again, it's going to be your individual census tract. In Kern County, there's census tracts that the income is over 130,000, whereas, so it's going to depend on exactly where your tract is. And now you see, full circle, the point of our actual poll question today. So what you're going to be looking at is you're going to be looking at around 64,000 and less for your census tract as median to see if you qualify as a low income community for that. We're going to really kind of limit what we're talking about as far as PPP forgiveness and the tax consequences. I know we have some state taxes that, some state tax programs that actually expire tomorrow and didn't have a chance to get into that today. So we're going to, and that's not going to be something we probably talk about next week, but really we'll kind of get into the forgiveness and a lot of the other tax aspects of the PPP as we kind of move along and more guidance becomes official. And actually, as we also get a little bit farther into opening of the PPP round 1 and draw 2. So there's a little bit on that. This is the state tax grant program. One of them is the deferral for sales tax. The other one was kind of an income tax credit program. And really to learn more at this very last moment, you only have 2 days, I would go to a State of California resource and look at those particular sites. One of those could be the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, or GoBiz. And I'm sorry, we just, with so much going on, just haven't had time to dissect that, even though it is closing on January 15th. Also, there will be some more lending programs that we'll talk about. And before I jump into the question and answers, our guest last week was John Shallard, and I told you we were going to be doing this Creating a Business Destination kind of course that's going to be a 6-day online course for 2.5 hours. That's going to be starting next week. $500 registration fee. And since, I don't like charging people for stuff, I might have access to some scholarships. If you're interested in attending this, and, I understand there's a pandemic going on and resources are tight, I can try to work you a scholarship. So send me an email if you're interested in this particular program That was our guest speaker presented last week. And we'll be back next week. But now let's jump to the questions and answers. And so here we go. Okay. Our first is going to be more of a comment and then a question. And it's, I filled out a very short interest form from our bank. No documents, etc. Does that sound right? I think each bank is going to be handling this differently. And as I mentioned, banks really didn't get this information. And so they're still going through the entire process and trying to dissect exactly many of the things that we talked to today. So a lot of that information is coming forthright. So I imagine what they did was they kind of put in a short form for you to do to try to see and try to test your eligibility. And then they will probably have some type of application process for those that actually qualify. So that would sound consistent with what I imagine a lot of banks are doing. List of lenders who are accepting applications. I did mention here in Kern County, we have Valley Strong Credit Union. A number of also what I've heard back from the Bakersfield Chambers that they have from their initial, and we will have more on this next week, throughout Kern County, our Kern County lenders, and maybe even more on some of the Central California region area. But what we're finding is that most of our lenders in Kern County are going to participate. It's really too early to tell with everything opening up today how many of those are open at this time. If I filed a personal bankruptcy last year and it's been finalized in November 2020, do I qualify for the second phase of the PPP loan? My best answer for that is going to be yes. I can't tell you 100% sure on that, but since it is not an open bankruptcy, if you've gone through a bankruptcy, you've reorganized, you've been able to satisfy creditors, and maybe the bankruptcy has positioned your business to move forward, I would think that that would be something that would probably be eligible. Covered period question, 8 to 24 weeks. So could you possibly reduce your hours and stretch it over the 6 months? And I would say it's going to depend on your individual business, but I would think that that would be a potential option. You do have a 24-week period to where, and that is almost 6 months. So you do have that availability to actually use that. I saw some people that would augment some of their cash flow from their business and actually use some of their grant proceeds over a much longer period. So supplier cost is the second phase of this question. And actually supplier cost, we'll probably have more on this, but right now it's coming down to that those are current. So I think if you go back in time, you're going to have a problem, but we'll have more information hopefully on what supplier costs are considered essential and current. And lastly, the last phase of the question is on the California grant program issues with the application. I would try to talk to Lynn, and I'd do that at 3 o'clock today. And again, we don't know what the demand is going to be for that. We might get 10 people, we might get 150 people. The room limit is 100 people. And we'll try to, for those of you that have application issues that have not been able to file your California relief grant, again at 3 o'clock. The nice thing about getting in and trying to get in for the first phase of the California relief grant is that you will not have to reapply once your application is in. And I might have mentioned that in the governor's budget is another $550 million for small businesses. So that might not happen until after the fiscal year in July. We're unsure on that as the budget hasn't even been ratified yet, but there are additional funds in there moving forward. And there is a chance if you get in this first round, you can be considered for all 3 of those particular potential phases. Let's see. What will be the turnaround after tonight's deadline? Well, initially, the timeline, the turnaround was scheduled to be, because originally the filing date was going to be last Friday, and I believe they were hoping to let people know in 1 week. So let's just say today's deadline goes smooth. I would assume that would be somewhat similar to their original timeline, which would be about a week. And I believe you'll be notified either if you received it or not, and your options in moving forward if you didn't receive it. So what is the 300 employee limit? And my understanding at this time is that it would be based on the 2019 number. Figuring that there is a chance you had over 300 employees and then you went under 300 employees with 2020, which would be common. You know, that's a good question. I'm going to look for a few for guidance on that was potentially released, and if not, there will probably be guidance forthcoming. That's the important thing to recognize, is that whereas we have a lot of the rules now, more of them are going to be coming out, and there's going to be more information that is made available to us as we go on and as we kind of ask a lot of these questions, and they're asked repeatedly. So for PPP2, can we use quarter 4 2019 against quarter 4 2020? And I think the answer to that is yes. I know there was some confusion earlier if you could only use the first 3 quarters, but everything we've seen so far is allowed, and even the form showed that I believe all 4 quarters were available. So yes, you can compare fourth quarter. If registered on January 20th, 2020, can you apply for PPP? The original PPP was you were able to apply for a PPP loan if you were in business before February 15th. So there's that. Can you review the average wages for seasonal employees for a hotel? We'll have more on that next week, but I would think that seasonal are going to be the same as regular. And if you are a lodging establishment and you have shown the 25% and you're a 72 based NACE code, you would be able to apply the 3.5 times. Moving down our questions. Will we be able to get a grant or loan for new hires? You know, new hires, and we didn't discuss that today, but new hires, there is a tax credit that's available that's been expanded. The expanded program that's part of the part of the Economic Aid Act. Actually, we will get into that next week, but yes, there's going to be a tax credit. There's not going to be a loan or a grant, just the tax credit that's been made available for businesses for new hires is what I understand. You know, if your new hire is actually somebody who left, you can use that. So let me kind of hedge on that. So you would be able to hire back employees. So I think I need a little more information on that, but possibly. Love the possibly. Okay, question, can you please clarify, elaborate eligibility for bankruptcies, businesses, or principals? Well, what I saw in the form, and I just really, that's the great beauty of the forms, is it gives you the actual, and it says a bankruptcy in process. So I would understand that to mean that if you've completed a bankruptcy before and you still have an ongoing business concern, that you should be able to actually qualify for that. One of the certifications is the applicant has not and will not receive another second draw PPP. I can't initial that because I'm applying for the second. I believe it means you won't apply twice. So one of the problems we had last time, and I think that you would actually be able to qualify for that because you're not actually, one of the things we ran into is the desperation factor that happened with the original PPP when the sources of funds appeared to be running out, and we had individuals that would actually apply through multiple banks. So I think that certification is going to be that you're not going to apply for another second draw, either potentially through another lender. Okay, so can the quarterly reduction of receipts be calculated on an accrual basis or on an actual cash receipts basis? And it's going to apply to whatever your business accounting method is. So you have an approved accounting method, either the accrual basis or the cash basis, and whichever basis you report for filing your tax return is the one that you're going to need to use. For second draw PPP recipients, are there new businesses formed after 1/1/20? Are they eligible? So I think that under that would be, because we had till February 15th, 2020, if I recall properly, and there's a lot of dates and information, and this old mind tries to remember it all, but it seems like it was February 15th, 2020. They were in business before that. If they had an original PPP and they meet all of the eligibility and all of the other requirements, then they should be able to show, and one of that is the 25% decline. So I see your point now. Excuse me on that. How do you show a 25% decline if you started your business in 2020? That is going to be difficult. That is going to really be difficult, and that really could preclude them, it looks like, from filing the second draw, because you would need to be in business at least one quarter, the fourth quarter of 2019. We're working our way through this just like you. So can you pay back rent that is owed and still qualified for forgiveness? Well, the rent would need to happen during the 24-week covered period if you elected the 24-week for forgiveness. Could you use the new funds to pay back rent? That is going to be, that is a good question. You guys really got some good questions going today. So can you pay back rent that is owed and still qualified for forgiveness? It just depends on, I think, if it's within that 24-week period. What are supplier costs for a restaurant that will be considered for PPP1 or forgiveness? Food, alcohol, paper, linen. I would think all of the above if they were current. I think if they were, and again, we're still waiting to hopefully get some additional guidance on this. And maybe it's out there already, but I think that is going to be a future FAQ from SBA on how to actually account for that. Now, if I used my intent of the program argument or my common sense, when they say current, I would say that it's going to be for those that were not past due and were within the period starting with the date that your PPP1 started, and they're in the covered period, be it 8 weeks or 24 weeks, whichever you elect. Okay, so what about net earnings versus total income? I had increased an employee without having an increase in revenue. So not totally getting the question. Let me try that again. You've increased employees without an increase in revenue. So if I understand right, maybe you're looking for an alternative method than the 25% revenue drop. I'm sorry, I just drawn a blank on that. Does gross receipts include donations? That's a good question. That is one that I will gladly send you the 3-page Word document I have, and we can actually go through that together or separately. But it could. Again, the SBA, even our consulting services are supposed to be mandated for-profit businesses, and donations are oftentimes associated with nonprofits. And in this case, I'm sure it is. So it'll be interesting to see what is on there, but I don't recall reading through the 3-page document and seeing the actual word donation as part of gross receipts. Does gross receipts include sales tax that is charged on each check? That is another great question. I could see a lot of SBA FAQs coming out. It's coming down to the gross receipts. The sales tax is something that is mandated, kind of like an excise tax, an alcohol tax, and others that is to be included. But it really isn't part of yours. You're just collecting that and remitting it to a state agency as far as sales tax. So I could see that as being an interesting question that might even come down when we get to businesses that are extraordinarily close on that 25% range on if that could or could not qualify. If a PPP has not yet been forgiven, does that qualify as gross receipts? Again, there's really no definition on that yet. I would assume that the intent is not to include the first round of PPP. I would assume the intent is to, if you know that there is going to be a portion that is not going to be forgiven, that could be included. But again, those are going to be this wonderful FAQs that are going to be coming out that we're going to probably be talking about over the next couple of months. Do you recommend asking for forgiveness of PPP before applying for PPP2 to establish that all funds have been used? And that kind of helps support my answer for the last question, because one thing that we had been told that potentially could happen was that with the PPP2 is you might need to apply for PPP1 forgiveness. That is not the case from what we understand now. So, I recommend taking the full time, the amount of time that you need in order to, number one, make sure that you have spent all of your PPP1 funds, that you have spent them in the right categories within your covered period, be it the 8-week or 56-day period, or the 24-week, 168-day period that is about 6 months. Yes, we will be sending out a lot of these links and the recording afterwards. Generally, it takes a day or two for us to get around. Sometimes I'm slower than that, and it's a little longer. Hi, can you review the loans and grants in numeric? Okay, the review PPP1, PPP loan, EIDL grant. So we do have consultants that can help review a lot of that information if that's what you're asking. The SBDC does have, no cost 101 consulting. We do have some areas that we specialize really well in these areas, and that would be available. When will it open for second draw businesses? Second draw businesses technically opens today for small lenders under $1 billion in assets. It will open on Friday. Each individual bank will open when they determine they want to open, if they want to continue to do the program. And here's another California relief grant. And again, I will just, if you have a question on that, on the application process, jump on our meeting today up to 100 people, and we'll try to get through as many of those questions in that forum as we can. Again, it's going to be informal. So please, if you have a question and you're available then, there's some other resources that I'm trying to get where they've answered a lot of these questions in different webinar settings, and we'll try to get that to you as well. Okay, so will the link be sent? So that's for the webinar. I think it could be in our chat right now. Let me go to chat real quick. I'm sure there's plenty of questions in the chat also. The Zoom meeting link is in there. It's toward the top. Maureen put it in at 12:20. So the 3 o'clock meeting on the California Relief Grant, the open forum, open questions. Again, please don't ask anything that's confidential or nature to your business. This is going to be a group forum. It's going to be open for SBDC clients, non-SBDC clients, anybody who can get in with the 100 people limitation that we will see. And who knows, maybe there'll be 5 of us in there. But the Zoom link is there as along with the meeting ID, and there is the passcode. This will have a passcode, unlike our webinars, that you'll need in order to get in. And I see lots of good stuff in the chat. But last couple questions, trying to get down to. When you go to the SBA website, it doesn't mention the EIDL grant that's coming out. I think that's common because right now there hasn't been any official release of documentation on that. So we talked about what we know of the general information, and I would imagine once we get down with the application process and a lot of the rules, that'll at least help the process move forward, until of course you ask all these great questions that they're probably being asked in a number of places around the country. So right now, if you go to the SBA website, the EIDL loan, you will see you can still apply for the EIDL loan. It was extended to the end of the year. The new thing called the EIDL grant, which is essentially last year's EIDL advance boosted up to $10,000 for those that will apply, should have documentation out on it soon, and we'll discuss it in coming weeks. My PPP loan disappeared from my B of A website. Oops, I didn't mean to mention the bank, but I'm assuming it's forgiven. I think that's consistent with, I think, what would happen after you've gone through a forgiven process. But I would contact your individual banker if you have any questions on that. They will probably be able to assist you do something like that. I have a new business that I formed in 2019, but I didn't do any business in 2019. I did not file taxes, I have not filed my taxes for 2020. So I do not know in regards to uploading the tax returns. Well, I see your point. Maybe your business formed on January 1 and you didn't start it until the following year in January 1, 2020. So you won't have taxes to upload. If you're going through the California Relief Grant format and forum, you can go into that and you can actually put non-applicable. Click non-applicable next to the tax returns. Asked that question just recently. Okay, I think that's about it. I'm sorry we didn't get through all of the questions, but we're not able to do so, obviously, because of time. We're at about 1:20. Well, that was exciting. Hopefully, if you will get in, if you have any questions regarding the California grant, we'll have much more details coming up forthright on the PPP #1, if you're just jumping in, or for the second draw. Continue to get guidance from SBA, and we'll continue to single it out and talk about it on Wednesdays. And we will be back next Wednesday for webinar number 45. Meantime, if you have questions, reach out to your SBDC consultant, your legal or financial advisor, whoever you can. There's a lot of resources out there. Find those resources, use those resources, and use those to make good business decisions. So that wraps it up for this week. I'm Kelly Bearden. I'll be back next week, hopefully, and we'll be on with number 45. So have a great week, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you.